Part of the reason I went back to tell the prequel of how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader is that it's an interesting story, and it's a fun story to tell, because it is the story of how a good person turns bad.
Holding her is dangerous. Word of this gets out, it could generate sympathy for the rebellion in the Senate.
I have traced the rebel spies to her. Now she is my only link to finding their secret base.
Darth Vader, a name Lucas wrote down even in the earliest drafts of the Star Wars screenplay. A lot of the ideas didn't make it from the first screenplay of the movie to the final film, but one thing was there early on. That was the name Darth Vader.
He was your favorite baddie, you know, he was doable as a bad guy.
It was a name that Lucas felt he needed to use, needed to set in stone that the most evilest man in the galaxy was named Vader. But what does Darth Vader even mean? True, the German word for father is Vader, spelt with a T. Was the name Vader used because Lucas knew even from the start that Darth Vader would be the father of the hero of Star Wars? That's very unlikely.
When I first saw the dialogue that said, "Luke, I am your father," I said to myself, he's lying. I wonder how they're going to play that lie out.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
But could there be something much deeper in the name Vader?
A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. He betrayed and murdered your father.
Lucas at one time said that the name Vader sort of just appeared in his head one day. One of the earliest names for the villain was Darth Vader. Lucas said he played around with that name, coming up with Dark Wilson, Dark Smith, Dark Vader. Then he combined two ideas he had, the Darth name and the Vader name. He came up with Darth Vader. But how did the name Darth Vader ever get into Lucas' head from the beginning?
You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Sure, it's easy to come up with a name like Smith or Wilson, but how do you pull Darth Vader out of your head? Is there a deeper meaning? For that, we go back to 1961, where the young George Lucas was a student at Downing High School. Inside the school yearbook is a hint at what it would become. On one page, on the bottom row, you see a young, beerless George Lucas, long before he ever dreamed up Star Wars or wearing flannel shirts. Nothing unusual at all. In the same yearbook, there's another photo taken at the same location of another class of students. There on the top row seems like a normal kid with just a normal name. But looking at the text under the photo, we learn that his name isn't Skip or Todd or Jack. It's Gary. And not just Gary. According to the yearbook from 1961, his full name is Gary Vader. Yes, Gary Vader. So who was this Gary Vader? And Lucas used the name of a close friend for the evil master of the galaxy? We really don't know much about him or his ties with George Lucas. Were they best friends? Or could it be that George Lucas saw Gary Vader as the evil master of the school? Thanks to that very same yearbook, we know that Gary Vader was a star football player. Could it be that the much smaller George Lucas was being bullied by the football-playing jock Gary Vader? Then years later, when looking for a name that would bring fear to the hearts of millions, Lucas reached back into his childhood for a name that brought him fear daily. Gary Vader. Now again, I'm not sure about the relationship between Lucas and Vader, but what is more likely? Lucas named him after a good friend, but he never said this in an interview? Or Lucas named him out of a school bully that made him feel like a powerless young man? Or maybe this is just some strange coincidence that George Lucas went to school with a guy named Vader. I could find very little about Gary Vader, other than a birth date of 1942, and at times he used the name Gary R. Vader or Gary Rex Vader. And currently, or for a time, it seemed he lived in Lone Barn, California. Other than that, and the yearbook photos, and his name linked to the high school, I could find very little about Gary Vader. Well, that's a look at the origin of the name Vader. Please subscribe to the channel and thumb up this video so I know you like my content. Until the next video, we'll talk again.
Hey, Junkman channel popping though.
Thank you, sir, for that unsolicited testimony.